all roads lead back to relationship being it. So for me, it's a relationship with God, a relationship with other, and relationship with these parts within self.
You have this hugely successful music career that I'm sure we're going to get into through our conversation. But what I want to start with and what I really want to unpack is your passion and interest in health and wellness. So I'm curious on when the latter started and what that origin story is.
I think based on the fact that I was highly sensitive in a way that back then felt like a curse in some ways, temperamentally, there's a conscientiousness to those of us who are sensitive. The theory being that 20, maybe 30% of us are temperamentally highly sensitive. And it doesn't mean the other 80 or 70% is insensitive. It just means that there's an actual trait within our bodies. And what comes along with it is propensity for depth of processing and a tendency to be overstimulated, because the theory also includes that those of us who walk into the room who are in the 80% non-sensitive, non-highly sensitive, pick up maybe 50 pieces of information upon walking into a room. And those of us that are highly sensitive pick up 500 pieces of information when we walk in a room. So it goes without saying, perhaps, that we get flooded a little quickly. And of the 20%, there's 4% who are empaths. So that takes it to a whole other level of attunement and being affected by energy, affected by other people's emotions, being able to wildly experience, be wildly compassionate in that, you feel everything almost sometimes more than someone across from you might be feeling. So there's a responsibility that has to be applied just for the current of energy and the incoming pieces of information for this type of temperament, and in some ways we're the priestesses and the philosophers and the scientists in some ways too. Anything that requires attunement to subtlety, it could be smells, culinary, all of it. Our senses are on fleek.
You talked about that subgroup of people that are empathetic. Are you part of that as well?
Yes. Pros and cons to all approaches, of course. But it just really means that if I hear about something or feel something that someone's experiencing, that my whole body experiences it. So as you can imagine, it's up to me to make sure that I prepare myself in different environments where a lot of people are feeling multiple different things at any given moment. But it really allows for a depth of connection to art, as an example, or when we're taking in music or taking in food or perfumes or smells or subtleties in a business structure. We can really tune into some of the subtleties that might be missed otherwise, which is a boon for any business or community.
And how old were you when you first noticed that something was different about you?
Right away, I thought, a lot of people in my environment were judgmental, or they'd want to shame my approach or what I would notice. And I was doing Reiki on my mom's upset stomach when I was 3 years old. I didn't even know what it was that I was doing, but I know that there was something in my hands that could potentially help her. So I just moved toward helping her. And, there were some giggles around. And in the world, it's only now where it's become so much trendier. All the cool kids are talking about consciousness and showing up and empathy and diversity, and all these incredible conversations are being had quite ubiquitously now, whereas 25 years ago or 47 years ago, whatever it is, it wasn't as popular. It was sort of shamed. And the implication was that you had to be an extrovert in order to really make it in the world. And we've seen countless of experiences of those of us who've grabbed the brass ring of the American dream or some other dream that's been imposed on us and indoctrinated into us. So many of us have reached those goals, everything's in quotes. And then we realize that everything is still the same. There's still underlying traumas, and maybe they're exacerbated by the experience of being in the public eye. Or there was a period of time where fame was, in the 60s and 70s with Joni Mitchell and everybody, fame was sort of a tool, where you could share your political views, your artistic views, your social commentary views. And now fame has become that which is sought on its own, as though somehow there's a payoff to that. And those of us who've experienced the egoic gratification of fame and the torture of the social relational awkwardness of being in the public eye and having people think they know you before they meet you. These are all there's no panacea, so to speak. There's not like, oh, now you have your billion, or now you in fact look 21 again, or whatever it is that we're chasing to legitimize our being here and uplift or augment the mundane humanity. I mean, we're all chasing some kind of felt sense of connection and oneness with God, within all these parts within ourselves, and with each other. And the bummer about the pandemic was we're already socially, relationally kind of freaked out by each other. And it exacerbated it. It really went, now not only am I scared of having my trauma triggered by an interaction, now I'm actually scared that I might straight up die if we sneeze on each other. Or so it sort of took any sort of isolating survival mechanism and turned it on 11 for all of us. So this last few years have been really hard for relationships.
You're somebody that reached such a high level of fame by 20 years old. I'm curious, was this something that you sought after as a kid and wanted to achieve, or it just kind of came secondarily?
It was a combination of an existential imperative, like there's a I must do this kind of element, whether I like it or not, and then combined with the fact that I'd been sold the same bill of goods that everyone has, which is that fame is going to correct all our developmental ruptures. And, if you think about what fame affords on paper, a lot of eye contact, a lot of positive reinforcement, a lot of projection, light and dark projection, and everything in between. So a lot of this is actually attachment stuff. And I have some theories about certain addictions or food or different substances and processes that speak to some of the developmental traumas that we've experienced in order to complete them or correct them, so that some of the pieces of the puzzle can come back to their birthright promise.
You're kind of alluding to this, and you hear it time and time again from people who have quote unquote made it, where you feel like all your problems are going to be solved at the snap of the fingers, and they really aren't. And again, in your case, all this fame came not overnight. You worked for it, but when things started to pick up, they really started to pick up for you.
Yes.
So everybody from the outside in is looking at Alanis and saying, okay, she's got, the popularity, the money's coming in now, all these things. Talk about at that point when things just really start to kick off. 1995, Jagged Little Pill is taking off. Talk about internally how you're feeling.
Well, the promise of fame, and it's the carrot that's dangled, is what you just said, which is once you're famous, all will be well. All your traumas will go away. You'll feel warm and tingly. All of the things that fame promises. But really, a lot of us seek fame or notoriety because we think it'll be a healing balm. So some of us come to this conversation wildly traumatized to begin with. And my experience is that when we're put in the public eye under those circumstances, it just exacerbates, right? If we're sensitive or we're triggered by certain things, now we have more experiences to be triggered by and more things to consider. And I actually falsely thought that becoming famous would throw me into this group of people whereby we'd all be supporting each other and singing Kumbaya around the fireplace with our s'mores, and Sharon Stone would be petting my head and I'd be cuddling with PJ Harvey, and but the opposite was true. Everyone was a little careful. This industry and most industries, from what I'm now understanding, there is a divisiveness. There's this scarcity mindset that there's only one throne and we all have to fight to the death for it, when really there's billions of thrones, So it's an interesting lifestyle to pick, but we're taught that we should pick it, that's something to aspire to. So then once those of us who are philosophical in any way are inside and looking around at what this fame story is, it can actually just re-traumatize, so we're traumatized chasing fame. And then once we achieve it, we're traumatized by fame. So there's a lot of grist for the mill inside of that. And some of us want to get to the truth of why we're here and what are we doing here and what matters and what doesn't matter. And I mean, these are lovely things to chase. And it's just such a human condition for us to be curious about how to make this mental world some semblance of homeostasis and relationally with each other in this, and creating safety with each other so that we can actually be the flower in that soil that blossoms with the sun and the water and the being left alone or loved up. I mean, we're animals, and we need certain things, and we can pretend we don't need it for survival. We can act aloof or be avoidant. But the truth is, we all need a sense of connection. It's what we're born into.
And did you have a plan B? Things ended up working out for you, but what would have happened if they didn't? Did you have another plan?
Well, the plan B idea is a little outside in for me. For me, when I was younger, especially, and it continues to this day, there's this imperative of self-expression. And in my particular case, and many people I know, it's multitudinous and multi-expression. So there was a period of time in the industry, the music industry, where I was being asked to, pick a lane, stay in your lane. And the challenge for me around that was that all my ideas and pictures and visions of what I wanted to express or participate in or collaborate in, they were multitudinous. There was an activism part, there's the music part, there's the smells and essential oils, there's the showing up, there's just showing up in all kinds of different ways. And self-expression includes picking the color of t-shirt that we wear on any given day, or, what lane we pick on the freeway, or who we decide to collaborate with. These are all forms of self-expression. And when we're sublimating or we're not allowing the truth of our felt experience to be, and we're fighting it, that's when we get sick. And that's when we're playing with substances, processes, and experiences of addiction. And, we're well-intentioned, we just want to make it okay to be here and to feel the sense of connection with each other. But if we're in environments where that's hard to do, whether it's politically or in an industry that is very scarcity mindset, it's set up to fail a little bit. So for me these days, with the polyvagal theory with Steve Porges and IFS with Richard Schwartz, just really communicating with parts from this capital S self, and then relational consideration. There's so many incredible authors and teachers, as you probably know more than anybody, that for me, the toolkit has just been blossoming, and any given moment can dictate what is needed. Sometimes I want to gestalt something or dance it or meditate through it or sleep through it, frankly, or snack through it. There's so many ways to address the struggle of being human, and yeah, here we are.
You talk about the toolkit. Let's come back to, again, when things really started to take off with your music. Where was the toolkit at that point? Because I know, again, your story goes all the way back to 3 years old. You were doing Reiki on your mom, but how established were your tools at that time?
I wouldn't have been able to have put them into words. I did read Keeping the Love You Find by Harville Hendrix when I was 15, and the Cinderella Complex and all these books, probably starting at around 11 and 12. I just started thinking, well, if I can't get these answers anywhere else, if there's no intellectual parity somewhere, and I need it to feel alive, I'm going to just get it through these authors. So I became the biblio obsesso from a very young age. And these authors felt like my friends, and a lot of them have become my friends, which is pure poetry.
And when did you really feel like you started to accumulate some tools? I don't know if it was meditation. We're going to get into a lot of different self-care, a lot of practices in the health and wellness space. But what point was it for you when you really started to practice some of these tools, see them working for you, and then your interests get piqued to, continue to research and connect with these different people?
Yeah, I mean, there's three major relationships that I attempt to cultivate, and they're like pillars or umbrellas, really. So there's the relational one, and that's parenting, romantic committed partnership, dating, everything in the range of relationships. And then there's my relationship with spirit or God or life, and to what degree can I trust that? If I'm making a decision at this point, can I trust life? And so many times I haven't trusted life, and I have felt scared of life, so the relationship with spirit, the relationship within my own self, and all the parts that want attention and really are attempting to communicate with me something that is needed to shift the system into more of a grounded elegance, and then so self, God, and other, so self in here, lowercase s, self, all the selves, and then other. So some kind of grace and some semblance of safety, the polyvagal theory with Steve Porges, the idea of being across from a safe other, a non-judgmental other. Pia Bellady talks about it too. And that is the point. That's the pay dirt point where life can become interesting. It's interesting to stay here or to be here or to push through some of this. And some of it is biochemical, neurochemical. Some of it is environmental, circumstantial. Some of it is cognitive, based on beliefs that we had sort of instilled in us from a very young age about, Byron Katie talks about how ubiquitous and predictable some of our main thoughts, like I don't matter, I'm not enough. And every single one of these, I've had chapters in my life where I really sort of, they became apparent. The cruelty toward myself was some part of me trying to protect me from pain. So it's just bringing consciousness to the kind intentionality behind any action. That doesn't mean that the action needs to be, praised. But the behavior and the person, and I do this a lot while I parent with my children, is that behaviors cannot work contextually. Like if you're trying to create safety and you're looking away and not listening well, but sometimes if you're with someone who's maybe exhibiting some narcissistic behavior, turning away would be appropriate. So everything's contextual, and does it work in this context based on what your goal is, as opposed to that's good and that's bad. The example I've used is with my son. If you're on the baseball field and you just won and your team's jumping all over each other and you're smacking each other's butts, apparently in that context, it's totally okay. But if you're in a line at the bank and you do that, you'll get arrested. So it's the same action. It's the same behavior. It's just contextually, does this work based on what we say we want? So we do a lot of this doesn't work, or that behavior felt really terrible to be on the receiving end of, but the innate self is the essential self is goodness. There's no way around that. Our brains may be, inclined toward or susceptible to certain things. And I've read, the Psychopath Inside, and how our brains can predict, if life circumstance triggers it and we're susceptible, that the sociopath, psychopath, narcissism, all of it. I became quite obsessed with understanding what was going on inside of those responses, really.
You talked about these different pillars and gave us a nice broad overview of, how you think about the world and how you take care of yourself. But let's talk like an average typical type day. What are some of the practices you have in place now that you've, lived your life, you're in your mid 40s and you've experimented with all these different tools and practices? What stuck with you and what's part of your regular practice?
There's so many. There's probably about 150, and they emerge whenever they're needed. Basically. So for me, a lot of it, the responsibility around my temperament and being responsible for it, is to take breaks throughout a day. And those breaks could look like anything. It could look like me yesterday just running around, and then I was walking at the front of my house, and I just thought, wow, I'm so exhausted on every level, existentially or otherwise. And I just sat on the ground and felt the breeze. And then my puppies came out and my kids came out and they jumped on top of me, and we all just sat there on the pavement in the sun. So moments of just taking breaks, no matter how awkward it might be. So I'll hide in bathrooms. I'll go into closets. So anywhere where I can just find that expansive, spacious stillness, whereby I can experience the many relationships that are going on. And I often say that it's not always the best idea to meditate. If we're inside some cognitive voices or loops or tapes that are really cruel, that might not be the ideal circumstance under which to meditate, if all that's going to happen is the voices get extra, they get louder, basically. So some cases it's like the human panacea, the safety, non-judgment, openness, really empathic listening, that is like watering a little seed in the soil and just, putting the nice amount of sun that is required. So, and the bigger question with depression and anxiety and all the beautiful addictions that do their job, as Byron Katie says, until they don't. What was I just saying there?
Well, let's come back to the piece where you're talking about pausing and taking breaks, because I know this isn't something that naturally comes to you. And part of your story is pushing too hard with the work and an actual addiction, you've referred to it as, in that realm. So let's talk
Yeah.
about that and when that started and how that served you, but it's something now you know about and need to keep in check.
Yeah, I think it was the survival imperative of how can I make this untenable circumstance be okay? So a lot of the relief and regulation that I was chasing would be found by naming it to tame it or marking. And I would find that in books. So if there were a theory or the systems theory or understanding why we resonate with what infatuation even is, why do I resonate with this person and not with this person who on paper might be functional for me? So to understand these pieces of the human development and condition and all these multiple systems um, of of our endocrine system, our hormonal, our neurochemical, our biochemical, our gastro, all of these systems that are working and all subtly interacting with each other at all times. This is nonstop research. I mean, there's every time I think, wow, I've learned a lot today. I can really have the felt sense of how much more there is to know. That will explain why we're here and why it's interesting to stay.
And when it comes to addiction, in your case, in the past, work being that addiction, what is underlying that?
So the work addiction, a lot of the work addiction is not all of the circumstances, but a lot of them are from having been parentified as a young child, being asked to take on more than was appropriate for that stage of development. That could be you're the older sibling with tons of siblings and you're taking on a parental role. It could be taking care of your parents in a way that ideally would have been reversed, where they would be attuned to you and they would be taking care of you. But if there's narcissism, then the young child will basically assume a role of poise or maturity beyond their years, and basically jump into a parent adult role when it's not developmentally appropriate. So that is sort of the starting point a lot of times for work addiction. And the ongoing pervasive message in the world is you are as good as your productivity, and if you're achieving, and if you've got, if you grab that brass ring and eat it, and you keep showing up in these 12 ways that are the American dream. You're a billionaire, you look 21 forever, there's so many things that we're told this is what success looks like and this is what we're to achieve. So I look at, even in the educative world, the overarching messages of, if you get these grades and you do this, then there's a check mark for your value and goodness in the world and your impact. And yes, impact, but what about being? What about the fact that you exist, and that is the miracle? And let's just stop there for a minute and dwell in that. Then talk about impact and achievement and define it for ourselves. Like, I want us to define what success is at any given juncture or rite of passage that you're in your life.
And I guess with the work piece, it's this self-fulfilling thing where I'm sure in your case you would agree, it's a double-edged sword that's probably led to a lot of success. So that's reinforcing when, you're pushing,
Yes.
pushing, pushing, and then you're seeing the results. And then you begin to think, this is what I need to do to
Right.
achieve this standard.
Yes.
So is that something that you think maybe help propel that along?
Yeah, it was self-perpetuating because we're praised for the very thing that is creating profound suffering. And it's cognitive dissonance, because I'm told that, the example I think of a lot is if someone's doing heroin till 4 a.m, ideally people would swoop in and, just say, wow, that's intense. And how can I help? Ideally. If someone's overworking till 4 a.m. and finish a product or project, and then you share that information with someone, there's a sense of pride that often is associated with that, where, oh wow, you worked that hard and you finished it, that's exciting. Now if we do that once in a while, that is what it is. But if we're constantly thinking that unless I have achieved X, I am nothing, we're set up to fail. We're set up to be depressed. We're set up to be suicidal. We're set up to not want to be here, because it's not the birthright that was offered in our coming into these funny bodies.
And I've heard you say, I think it was in another interview, where you've gone through phases in life where you've pushed so hard, you would have these burnout phases and go into states of panic every few months. And then that would, naturally facilitate you slowing down and having recovery time.
Mm.
What point in your career was this, and how long did that go on for?
Well, I mean, I could present it as tame, which is sometimes it would just be, oh, I've reached my max and I need to take a nap. But that wasn't really possible circumstantially and with what my mindset was and my work addiction. So in some ways, I would push it often until there would be a felt sort of psychotic split, almost like this fragmentation of all these different parts that are trying to be good, trying to be perfect, trying to show up, trying to live the American dream, and then somehow, serve people macrocosmically. And so it was a little bit, it's a little bit too much. But your question was, what was your question?
Just going through phases of burnout because you're pushing so hard, and then that leading to a period where you're forced to slow down and recover, but then
Yes.
that cycle would repeat.
Yes. And also being praised for it. So in some ways you're being gaslit by life, right? You're being told that this is what makes you great, and yet you're not having that felt sense in the somatic experience. You're not feeling alive and connected and warm and inspired and creative and curious and present and powerful. You're not feeling any of those things, but you check the box of what we're supposed to chase. So it is self-perpetuating, and it's ongoing crazy making behavior because we're being rewarded for something that hurts. And that's common in Hollywood. It's common everywhere, that we have this egoic co-opting. It just swoops in and says, this is the right way to feel what? To feel regulation. I mean, most of us are chasing that embryonic experience of warmth, a sense of connection to all, inspiration. We're chasing regulation in some ways because regulation is the jumping off point, right? So especially with the pandemic or in general, just lifestyles, dysregulation became the norm, and to stay in that chronic revving in the red, we collapse. There's a collapse. The collapse can look like the burnout, and even testing some of the hormonal levels. Our cortisol ideally is hovering around 20 in the morning when we wake up, those levels. And it was being noticed that people's levels were 1 or 2. And the initial thought was, oh, I guess the cortisol levels are low. But no, they had been revving in the red for so long that everything collapses. So there's this adrenal fatigue. Everything just shuts down because our bodies are not meant to be in fight, flight, freeze, shut down, tend to befriend all the time. We are animals, ideally with some consciousness imbued in there, but we're animals. So if you watch animals in the wild, there are concerted times of pure rest. And if there is predatory danger, which there also is for us, I have this great image that I remember of Peter Levine in one of the videos at one of the trainings. And it was a tiger, basically, a big tiger looking around, protecting, while their mate or their buddy or their child was sleeping, just sprawled out, drooling, adorable saber-toothed tiger. And so there was a watcher, and it really speaks to how important relationships are, this sense of safety, the felt sense of it, and having that be the set point versus the set point is terror, right? Terror is meant to be temporary. It's not meant to be protracted and ongoing and chronic. That's a new trauma.
In an overall sense, it sounds like you learned how to balance your life and not hit that stage of burnout over time. What I'm curious about, what did it take to get there? Was it because it sounds like this cycle went on for a period of time. What was it for you? Did you hit a certain climax point when you realized, I can't do this anymore. I got to bring in these other practices. I got to put these other boundaries in place. So talk about what that looked like for you, because now it seems like you have that understanding, you have that in check. What did it take to get there?
I wish I could say it was one turning point, revelatory moment, but they're just glimpses, just turning points of epiphanies, really. So talking with parts, wrote Hand in My Pocket when I was 19 about these parts, but wasn't entirely aware of the practice. So Margaret Paul and Richard Schwartz and Debbie Ford, just became really close with them and inspired by their models because it spoke directly to my understanding of my own self and of humans as being multitudinous. right? There's one part of me that might have murderous rage and another part that's excited and another part that couldn't care less. And that these can be concurrently happening at any given time, that we have all these parts that need attention or don't. And most of the time, all of them are trying to protect or serve or keep me safe, keep the system safe. But bringing any of this into awareness, into consciousness, in my case, through therapy and through group work, which was risky as someone in the public eye. It wasn't my favorite, but I knew I needed group work. Irv Yalom is such a big fan. And just the idea of doing something one-on-one, which is really great for those of us who are sensitive, bringing it out into safe group, and then some movement brought in and some felt sense. Because initially, when I started doing this work, especially the embodiment work, I just thought, well, why? What's the point? What's the point? Okay, great. I'm embodied, but I'm still suffering. And now I can point to the suffering. Why do I want to do that? But it just was an invitation back into the body. My survival strategy included dissociation and jumping out of my body anytime I could. So this was a slow, safe invitation to come back in. And the image that I see is these puzzle pieces that slowly come back in one at a time. And it wasn't a quantum leap turning point moment. There are just junctures and chapters of insight, really.
What I think I'm hearing you say is before you would use work as a way to, push through and not listen to the subtleties that your body was trying to tell you. And then through this group therapy and other therapy and taking time to listen to your body, you're able to start to unravel what you needed.
Yes. And also just seeing the interiority world as safe. I remember my son was about 4 years old, my eldest. And at one point he was having a really sort of challenging, multiple emotional moment. And I said, do you want to go in there? And he said, Mom, I can't go inside. It's too scary in there. And I remember leaning toward him and just saying, what if I came in with you? We can go in together. And then when it's too much, we jump back out, He said, okay. So he felt that. I have always felt that sometimes I would feel ill-equipped to go within. What do I do once I'm in there? And all these parts are trying to get my attention. The part that is an artist, the part that's a mom, the part that's burnt out, the part that wants to serve the world, the part that just wants to shave my head and move to Goa. All these parts have agendas and needs. And it can be like basically parenting 500 children in some moments. So again, it's titrating and slowing things down for me because my brain, and there's a lot of kinetic movement. And so whenever I slow down, grace enters very, very quickly. And pain and all the things that I've been avoiding can come in. So it's sometimes being across from another to help that safety be established is huge. And then once we can start to create that safety for ourselves, and it didn't happen right away for me, it's still just being developed now, to be honest, then it's safe for me to be alone because there's a trusted capital S self that can be there to dialogue and be curious and leave space and let the crying happen and let the anger happen, not in the destructive acting out way, but just letting that force move through us. I didn't feel safe doing that on my own for a very long time, but now I do.
As someone in the public eye who's been, pretty much constantly putting out work since you were, 20 years old, when you decided to go in and do this deep work, which is a lot of work, did you have to take a period of time and put your work aside and totally pause to work on Alanis? Or was it kind of, working during the day and doing this work at night?
It's inextricably linked. So, it's basically it's an inquiry-based approach to life. So, if I'm on a tour bus at 3 a.m. in Italy, I could be doing the work in that moment. Journaling has always helped, writing things down so I can see it. Anytime I can achieve a sense of objectivity, it's like I love red-tailed hawks, and I love the whole eagle approach of I want to see the big picture. I want to step back, have some element of objectivity brought into this. So it's almost like zooming out, seeing the big picture in spiritually too. Like our lifetimes are blips on a radar of millions of years and multiple galaxies. So feeling how I'm part of this whole evolutionary imperative expressed, right? And then being able to zoom in on the tiny false beliefs or thoughts that were in there from the time that I was 3 years old. And I said, my opinion doesn't matter in patriarchy, or didn't know the word patriarchy at 3. But, so there's never a moment where inquiry isn't, for me, appropriate. Like, what's happening now? What do I need? What do you need? It's so much more collaborative and relational, which is a sign that some healing has happened for me, because typically if I wanted to do something that was very important to me, I would be alone to do it. So for me to reach out and be vulnerable and be empowered and have vision and do that in community, that's a whole level of healing for me. And some of it actually happened during the Broadway musical of Jagged Little Pill. I remember sitting in the audience receiving my music for the first time, because as you can imagine, I'm just sort of monologizing all this and moving it and churning. And so for me to sit in the audience and behold it, and then also hear these songs being sung through the lens of different genders and different age groups and races and plights, it was pretty mind-boggling to be on the receiving end of that. And I did have a glimpse of objectivity of why my continuing to write songs might be valuable.
Did you feel at that time, again, seeing it from this different angle, were you really proud of the work that you had created?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I felt pride, because something that my managers over the years have loved is that I haven't had any objectivity. Even when I was writing with Glenn Ballard, writing You Ought to Know, he would turn to me and say, "Do you see what's going on here?" And I would say, "Nope. What's going on here?" So there would be this lack of sense of self that came from traumas and that came from parentification and came from being around narcissism. It's just this loss of sense of self. So yeah, watching the musical was cohesive in some ways. It allowed me to integrate a lot of what my life has been over the last 30 some odd years.
You said something there that really caught my attention about life being a little blip in the big scheme of things. And I'm just curious how you think about death and use that as a tool, because when you do think about life that way and how minuscule, and again, not in a gross way, but like
describing. Yeah.
It allows you, it takes the pressure off. And as somebody in the public
Yes.
eye who's a performer and is putting art into the world to be looked at by others, I could see how you could get caught up in your perfection and caught up in overthinking everything you're doing.
Yeah.
But when you take that zoomed out view that you just talked about, that can take the pressure off. So I'm curious if you've used that and how that served you.
It has served me on many occasions to be able to pull out, and it just helps me not be precious about something. If someone is getting hyper egoic with me, and that could look like winning awards and everyone going, "Oh, you did it." Can we take a photo of you holding your award? I would have this internal conflict, because I would just think, well, in some ways, any of us who are still alive, and even some of us who aren't, we're all warriors. I can't believe we're all still here. Just, being in the public eye, I've often thought is just social activism, because unwittingly or not, we're inviting people to define themselves in accordance to us as an actor, as a singer, as a writer, as a philosopher, as a therapist, as an expert in any field. So people are defining themselves in accordance to us in the public eye. And that's an active social invitation. That's activism right now. You trip and you fall in the public eye, and you're an activist, because you're allowing people to define themselves. And that's all we're ever doing. I hate that. I love that. I hate that. I love that. I mean, we're all defining who we think we are anyway.
Do you ever use thinking about death as a tool? Say your mind's running and you get caught up in all these little nuances and minutia to pull you back to the moment, to something like you talked about earlier, that moment that organically happened for you the other day, where with your kids and your dogs, and an experience like that, which is, the true essence of life. But thinking about death again can bring us back and let us forget about all these ruminating thoughts that we can all get caught up in.
Yes. Yeah. I call it just deathbed it. So if I'm really attached and super identified with different parts, or as Richard Schwartz would say, blended with a part that really wants to act out, or I just think about, so what did you just say right there? Sorry, my brain is like, woo!
We're getting into the deep stuff.
I love it. But you just said, what was the invitation in that question?
It was just that thinking about death as a
Oh yeah,
tool to come into the
yes,
present and to just say,
yes,
okay, these thoughts, they really don't matter. The all these little things I'm worrying about
yes.
really aren't the essence of life, and they don't matter.
Right. They really feel like they matter in the body, though, right? Because our bodies basically just tell us what's safe or not. You know, our bodies are built to stay alive on that animal level. So if we look at two caves, and one cave has a history of bears killing humans in there, and another cave has a history of nothing, our survival imperative is going to keep checking that cave nonstop, basically, to stay alive. So a lot of people ask, and I've asked this many times, especially when I was younger, why do I remember all the trauma? Why do I remember all the challenging times? Why can't I just very naturally remember the positivity? Well, we're built on an animal level to stay alive with the saber-toothed tiger afoot, right? So keeping that in mind, keeping the humanity and the body and the neurochemical, the whole system, hormonal, all of it, taking that into account while we have the privilege and gift of having consciousness, right? To take the pause when part of me wants to punch, or to take the, when I want to keep working and stay on the treadmill of life, the hamster wheel, to stop. I mean, these are consciousness actions, and so the deathbed one is a big one. If I'm getting lost in the minutia, as you said, or if I'm getting lost in fear, anxiety, is I'll go imagining my deathbed. I imagine my death a lot, actually, not in a macabre way, but more in a way that will illuminate that what's happening right now might not matter as much. And I used to ask my friends if we were in the middle of any kind of juncture in our lives, the many rites of passage, and they'd say, what's important for me, and I'd be supporting them or helping them in whatever way I could. I would just say, is this something that you'll remember in 5 years? Is this decision or this canceling or this postponement or the thing that sounds like everything's going to fall apart? Will it even be on your radar in 5 years? So the deathbed perception, or just dwelling in that, sounds horrifying in some ways, but it's actually quite liberating, because then I look back and I think on that deathbed, what's going to matter to me in those final moments? What's going to be on my spiritual radar? And 99% of the time, what I'm grappling with won't be. So there's a lightness.
And as somebody who has this propensity to work, that's in you, continue to work, you're a hard worker. With today's world, with the internet and social media, it's like you can always get pulled back in. And again, thinking about death and what really matters, like maybe that'll be a catalyst to take extra moments like you talked about earlier with the kids and the dogs, and realize like this is just a trap, getting pulled back into work all the time.
Yes. And, to the degree that working hard is self-expression, right on, and then to the degree that working hard is a way of attempting to control the uncontrollable or abate a chaos, it doesn't really work. I love that we seek relief-seeking measures all the time, and our intention is pure. We don't want to feel that somatic felt sense of what resistance creates in our bodies, which is tension and piercing pain. And for those of us who are highly sensitive, those are felt in a very intense way. So gaining perspective is a big deal. And a lot of times we can't do that on our own. I can't always do that on my own. I need to phone someone or I'll ask someone to mirror me. It's a big stage of development where we mirror, and it's usually the identity phase of development where someone says, I'm Superwoman or I'm Superman. Yeah, you are. We still need that mirroring in our lives. And for those of us who didn't get a lot of it for, patriarchal reasons or abuse, neglect reasons, we need it. And we can only get that in relationship. So the theory being that if we were wounded in relationship, the corrective experience or the healing happens in relationship. But it can be scary at first.
When you talk about calling a friend there and relationships, it gets me thinking about, again, busyness of being a hard worker, somebody that was in the public eye and still is, but I'm talking about jagged little pill days when things are just crazy. Did you always prioritize relationships? Because I find those are something that are easy enough to put aside when things get busy and when things get chaotic, but they are so precious and something that Luckily, if we do quote unquote neglect them, there are things that we can rekindle and rebuild on, because I'm sure we all have ebbs and flows. And in certain times, like when we have kids and stuff, that we don't actually have the time to invest like we did before, or during certain busy periods of our work and our artistic expression. But what I'm getting at here is, was this something for you that you've always realized the importance of and kept those relationships going and had that as part of your toolkit, not in a selfish way, but naturally it will serve you in a positive way?
Great question. And yes and no. So some of the traumas made it that I just thought humans across from me were dangerous and they couldn't be trusted, because that was the overarching repeated voice, right? That humans can't be trusted, or that they'll betray you, or, and then if, sure enough, that would be the circumstance if that was the lens that I was looking through. But yeah, for me, we're such whole multitudinous creatures. So it's cognitive, it's emotional, it's sensual, it's spiritual, it's energetic, it's endocrine systems. That we're so beautifully complicated and yet deliciously simple after a while too, because there is some need that is, we can get a lot of our wants, and that creates a sense of glee, but the needs being met bring us up to ground zero. And then the wants are that which adds to happiness, or, states of joy and glee. That's great. But the needs are big ones. And these are, Maslow's straight up needs of non-sexual loving touch, eye contact, warmth, nutrients, certainly roofs over our heads, and relationships, and touch. So Sue Johnson, Harville Hendrix, John and Julie Gottman, Helena Kelly Hunt, and a handful of us. Dan Siegel started an organization called Relationships First. And the invitation around that was, what would this world look like if we prioritized the quality of relationship over everything? And it's been a really incredible inquiry, just being around people who live for the messaging of relationships being as important as they actually are. I mean, anything from mirror neurons to the polyvagal theory with Steve Porges, all of it, all roads lead back to relationship being it. So for me, it's a relationship with God, a relationship with other, and relationship with these parts within self. And some of the times I just needed some support in how to manage that and how to navigate it, especially if when I started, there was a whip cracking cruelty, basically. And these cruel voices are trying to help. They're trying to protect me, but they've outgrown their stay.
I find that with myself and others, there's something about the tangible things in the health and wellness space that seem to be easier to make consistent as part of the routine, whether it be eat a certain diet, exercise, do XYZ, however many days a week. When it comes to things like relationships or meditation, where they're free and more subjective, I feel, and even for myself again and for others, the consistency can be harder to maintain.
Yes. Well, the less tangible ones are sometimes harder to maintain. Journaling's been great because I'll just see where there's a resistance or an unrest. The definition of stress being here and wanting to be there. So where am I resisting is a great starting point for any kind of meditation or journaling. What am I scared of? What am I resisting? Those two are pretty big ones. And I like to reduce things to the lowest common denominator, and they're all, Byron Katie said that there's no real new thoughts. They're all the ones that are really challenging for us have to do with our worth, that we're not worth, that our worth is low, that we're alone, that we don't matter, that we're not enough. So these thoughts can they can be lovingly challenged and inquired into, like, what would be available if you softened that thought, if you didn't protect, in this case, if you didn't protect this whole system of me, what are you afraid would happen? So this inquiry is really an incredible way to live, because it's merciful, first of all, And it also yields such beautiful answers. And they're always vulnerable. They're always fear of death, a fear of loneliness, fear of hopelessness. All roads lead back to a lot of the same thoughts. There's like 25 of them basically, and they cycle, and I've lived them all, and we all live them, and then to lovingly challenge them and to, with compassion and empathy, shift that. And that's been hard for some of us who have really cruel voices that are really loud in here.
When it comes to journaling and just letting your mind, wander and get into the depths that you might not get into during day-to-day conscious experience, is that where a lot of your songs come from, or at least the inspiration?
Yeah. When I sit down, a lot of people say, how long does it take to write? And I'll say it takes 15 minutes, but it also takes 40 years, because these are all, it's almost like the bucket gets filled with all these experiences and thoughts and questions and insights and revelations. And then when I sit down to write, if there's a theme or a dialogue that I want to focus on, or a relationship, the song, music and lyrics, writes itself very quickly. And usually with no changes to be made in terms of the actual writing of the song. So I trust that now. When I first started doing it when I was quite young, I would always, cross my fingers that a song would come. And now I know that a song will come, and maybe 2 songs will come, and that can be relied on, that the unconscious met with this profound receptivity that I show up in the studio with, and using my intellect as a siphon, that all those elements in place will yield a song of some kind.
Let's talk about the new album coming out. You've got this new meditation album, and it's a totally different piece for you. Let's talk about the inspiration behind doing something different like this, and what that creative process was like versus, writing traditional music you've done in the past.
Yes, the process was different for many reasons. One was that, it was during COVID, and I reached out to Dave Harrington, who produced and co-wrote everything with me. And we only met once at the Hollywood Bowl after my show. So the entire time it was through Zoom and sending things back and forth to each other and having recording sessions where I'd see his face and he'd see mine, and I'd be at the keyboard or making sounds. And I just remember before I started to work with Dave on this record, I remember thinking I didn't have a new record with stories and a narrative and lyrics in me, but I wanted to selfishly create something that the process would be healing and corrective during a really stressful time during the lockdown times, and something that I could offer to people that would actually be helpful during a time that, there's a lot of suffering and a lot of sense of disconnect. So, and what I wanted to make sure of is that it wasn't presented as this one note where we're either regulated or we're not regulated. It's parasympathetic or sympathetic, that there's subtleties in all of it, and that we can have multiple feelings at the same time. And these tracks were written in a similar way in terms of process. The one thing that I found really challenging was that I couldn't come up with a title. I couldn't come up with the titles for the songs even, because there were no words. So things were much more ephemeral and intangible. But then one night I just said, okay, the deadline is near and it's lovingly oppressive. So I just sat with what these songs really meant to me. And that's how the titles emerged in the title of the record, The Storm Before the Calm Came. Just really implying that we're much more, I can hold the complexity of what it is to be human to some degree. And that we might feel anger when we sit down to meditate. We might feel agitated. We might feel completely blissed out. It just depends on the moment. So this record has something for all kinds of different states. Pia Melody talks about, love, passion, anger, shame, guilt, like all these feelings, So I would just be in those states. Well, actually, the music would conjure those states, and then the title would kind of connote what the general energy was. But the truth is, when I write these songs, they're for me. And then the second I share them, they're not mine anymore. They're yours to do with as you will.
And when you go out on a limb like this and do something totally different and share it with the world, at this point in your career, you've been doing this for so long, is that a scary thing for you, or are you pretty comfortable?
I'm pretty comfortable. I know a lot of artists who have experimented over the years, and they got, some people were like, "Don't change. I need you to be what you've always been." But there is a continuity in this record, because it is the same process. There's just no words. And I mean, if ever there was a proclamation about music being the universal language, I mean, this record really, really embodies that for me, because there's certain messaging and cellular shifts truly with certain music that we listen to. And a lot of people assume that I was a musicologist and I know everything about every band and every artist, and I don't. And a lot of times I don't actually listen to music because my life is so cacophonous in general that when I do have a time to myself, I'm either listening to Tibetan bowls or meditation music. And so then I thought I'd love to start creating that kind of music that could be used in this way.
And when you go all the way back to your orientation to meditation, how far back is that? And what was that experience?
I think I could do meditation really well for a very long time. But there is something about the proprioceptive somatic experiencing approach, Peter Levine, and so many amazing authors and teachers, that it's this invite into the body, slowing it down and really exploring what's going on in here and what it means. Because a lot of times I'd be afraid of sensation, anything that would conjure a sensation in my body, I would attempt to avoid it. And as you can imagine, that makes life kind of complicated if you're spending your whole life trying to avoid triggers. It can get really insulated and isolated. So it's almost like exposure therapy. Like I would tiptoe out and get, grist for the mill. I'd read, maybe 20 years ago, I'd read an article that was kind of mean. And then I'd say, okay, I'm taking this back to my journaling and meditation or my therapist today to see why that stuck with me or why that triggers, because I probably believe it's true on some level, right? So it became this exercise in what resistance can I let go of today? And all of it, the lowest common denominator element of it is just a vulnerability, that we have needs and that we are vulnerable, and we live in a world that says that you're successful if you're impenetrable and you don't have those needs. And if you can eradicate those needs, somehow you win. I'm like, there's no winning when my aloofness keeps me so-called safe for a minute. I don't feel like I'm winning. I feel like I'm in some purgatory pause button experience.
Alanis, part of your health and wellness journey has been experimenting with different diets over the years. I'd love for you to talk about that path and where your diet currently is.
Yeah. So when I was younger, I had bulimia and anorexia, and I would just sort of bounce between the two for many years. Some of it was around, if I had some fat on my body, that I wouldn't be predatorized. There was a lot of just attempting to stay safe. And the subtleties of getting inside of what an eating disorder is, it's just so complicated to talk about. Not unlike postpartum depression, unless someone's been inside of it, it's tough to say, because the general projection is, well, why don't you eat less? Why don't you exercise more? Like, if it were that easy, do you not think we'd all be doing that? So I started going to therapy when I was about 15 or 16 about my eating disorders. And I learned so much about myself. And another gift that came along with that was understanding nutrients and microminerals and phytochemicals. And I've spoke with a lot of doctors and voraciously read books about everything from hormones to peptides to nutrients, microminerals, mushrooms, all of it, like to figure out how to become as healthy as I possibly can. And Lord knows I've done the whole range. I've had moments of just not treating this body with any kind of respect. But I was also seeking relief. So that's part of the addiction journey. But in terms of food, I went through probably a 10-year period of veganism, and then jumped back into omnivorism, and vegetarianism, pescatarianism. I've done so many different versions over the years, and I just have to be careful, even with the fasting. It can so closely near enemy mimic eating disorder that, I just have to stay alert, because it's a quick slippery slope for me to go back into this deprivation, this beautiful sense of control I have if I'm manipulating what I'm eating or not eating. But now I call myself a nutritarian. If people say, what are you? I say I'm obsessed with nutrients. So my kids are the same way now. They'll hold something up and they'll say, any nutrients? And I'll go, no, enjoy. Enjoy the toxic chemicals that will get you. But now we just think about nutrients, and there's stuff on the fridge. And I love being a student in the food world, not only in the culinary, super exciting international food, but also, what is in this? What vitamins are in this? And just being a scientist, it's quite fun.
Talk more about the kids piece there, because I think this is a challenge with a lot of parents where, they're tuned into what a healthy diet looks like and hopefully are consuming one themselves. But when it comes to kids, it can be a whole nother challenge, and even a partner, you're a romantic partner. So as somebody with 3 kids of different ages, I think your youngest is at 2 and all the way to 11?
2, 5, and 11, yeah.
Yeah. So you have a wide range there. From your experience, what has worked for you to, help guide them along this journey when it comes to healthy eating?
Well, I just want to validate that any parent is dying for our kids to eat their greens and their fruit and their high nutrient, and their taste buds can shift. I mean, I've had every experience, reaching out to doctors saying, what do we do? And, some of them say, just let them get hungry. Eventually they're going to eat those tomatoes, And then as a kid, I had experiences where I was forced to finish my meal or I couldn't go to bed. So horrifying, where I ate cooked cauliflower that I hated so much and I threw up all over the table, and my parents said, okay, we're never doing that again. We're so sorry. The idea of kids needing glycemic sugar for the development of the brain, and realizing that they're just going to crave certain things because their imperative is to develop. And for us, it's about making certain things available and making it fun sometimes, which can be exhausting, but it actually has worked for us, where I just honor their appetite, because what I did learn, many things I've learned from healing from eating disorders, was that I didn't trust my body. I didn't trust my appetite. If I had a craving, I didn't trust it, So now I really trust it. And I have enough knowledge to know that if I'm craving tannins, or I'm craving protein, or I'm craving greens, or I'm dehydrated, I can understand the subtleties of those cues now in a way that I couldn't when I was younger. It was all kind of neutral and everything felt dangerous. And I was trying to figure out, is food an addiction, sugar, all of these things that just created the glycemic party of up and down. That can be pre-diabetes for some people. So yeah, just continuing to learn. And then in terms of my kids, we do a lot of taste tests. So I'll lovingly blindfold them if they wanted to. And I'll put, a walnut, a piece of chocolate, a banana, something really disgusting, like, I don't know, some vegan pate. I just do risky stuff and stuff that I know is pay dirt for them in terms of deliciousness. And then there's about 12 things on the plate, blindfold, and they'll pick one and they'll go, I want more of this, So when I have the bandwidth, which is clearly not always, but then I'll find what they like and attempt to augment it. And then other days I'm just mortified that, I really want you to finish this super healthy dish, but you're now wanting ice cream. Okay. So it's really about what we make available, and also cutting ourselves slack as parents, that we'll sneak the nutrients in. And if they reject the smoothie, or they reject the salad, or they don't eat the broccoli, that there's going to be ways for us to get those nutrients in there, and we can make it fun.
Let's talk about the homeschooling piece, because I know I have 2 young kids at home, and I know how busy.
How old are they?
One is 5 months old, and the other is just 2 and 5 months. So
wow, congrats.
Yeah,
you're in it.
I'm in it. So I get how busy that can be. And I'm somebody that works at home, so I get the challenges navigating work with family life.
Yes.
So Alanis, you're somebody, again, likes to work hard. You're in the public eye. You're creating all this beautiful work for the world. And then you become a mom, not of 1 kid, but 3 kids over the years. And you're schooling them at home. So I'm just curious. I think you obviously have figured out some things in the productivity realm to make that all work and flow. Let's talk about how, specifically jumping in on the homeschooling piece, how you guys made that decision and how that works with everything else.
It's a privileged place, so I just want to mark that out of the gate. I'm in such privileged positions so many times, and that's not lost on me. So I figure if I am in a privileged position, why don't I take advantage of what I can inside of this paradigm or inside of this reality? One of them, a lot of times I'll do something that's very organic and I don't know what the label for it is. So people would say, oh, you're so wry, you're so attachment, you're so, you're so regio, and so of course I would want to know what they were talking about. And I'd go down the rabbit hole and figure, oh, okay, this is why. I'm just doing it naturally. I'm not thinking about it. And this is what it's called. So I've come to learn a lot about different models and educative approaches and multiple intelligence theory and the idea of of as much as I possibly can, the whole breadth of what it is to develop on a psychological level, on an intellectual level, on a numerological math level, like what is it, all these intelligences, and how do you best channel them, knowing that every single human being is completely different in how they approach their neurodiversity and how they learn, or is it through reading, writing, audio, combination thereof, doing it themselves. So it's fascinating, and my curiosity about the human condition is serving me well with this, because when I present something in the homeschooling environment, just to see what their natural inclination is there, sometimes we'll present something and they're engrossed in it for 2.5 hours obsessively, and other things we'll present and I'll just think, this is a good one, and I'll present it to them and they're just like, I don't care, so the general things of the agenda for curriculi, reading, writing, arithmetic, and all of that, it's sometimes they're super into it and they want to learn the kind of conventional schooling stuff, and other times they don't. So it took a lot of faith. Both my parents are teachers. My dad was a principal for many decades. So the idea of ongoing education is just imbued in our worldview. And I never thought twice about it, because I research all the time. There's not a day that goes by that I'm not researching or reading something or attempting to find out more. So I've relied on that part, that natural curiosity, and I assume it of everyone. And it's our curiosity that is often stymied or chopped off. But when you look at a child, they're innately curious. They want to know what's going on. So to keep that natural curiosity going, and it's gotten to the point where if anyone asks any question day or night, it's an immediate research. God bless the iPhone for that. Just immediately researching, like, where does this go when you flush the toilet? And let's look, or what is this bug? What is this plant? So there is a lot of following that. And then there's a lot of shame, of course, that I have, that I'm not in any position to do this properly. And what am I doing? And I'm insane. It depends when you catch me. But for me, it's about keeping that light and that curiosity and that excitement about knowledge and ongoing education alive. And they see me doing it. They see me reading a new book or reading an article or chatting about it with their dad and my friends. So it's a very philosophical environment where asking questions is super normalized as opposed to shamed.
Alanis, as somebody who has traveled around the world performing, I have two parts to this question. One of them ties into the kids. Is part of their learning to take them on adventures as you guys travel the world and to experience, different cultures and different ways of being? And two, how integral was that as you traveled around the world, doing all these different concerts and performing? What different tools did you pick up from different cultures that are part of your health and wellness regime?
Yeah, I'd have to pull out a big scroll on that one, because I'm so influenced by having traveled so much from a young age. Traditions, costume, skin color, food, music, musicians, spiritual practices, aesthetics, architecture, design, tarot cards. I mean, there's just too much information everywhere I go. And I just, my tendency is just to eat it all up as much as I can. And it's almost like I feel like a reconnaissance, like I go out into the world, and I've done this since I was really young, and just just feel like a beholder, the 5 on the Enneagram, just sort of watching and observing and processing and then also contrasting, like, okay, so this is how they do it in Belgium and this is how they do it in Australia. Trippy. And what does that mean? What does that mean about the culture and what is made available through that? So it's this ongoing beholding and processing. I mean, that's what I think my life is behold something, process it. And traveling is exactly that. It's also such a gift. I mean, the sensual stimulation of what's available all over the planet in any given room or train or audience. I'll get to know a culture just based on what their physical movements are, or how loud they get, or how quiet they must remain. Or it's just an interesting study in planetary diversity for me.
And have your kids been exposed to a lot of travel over the years?
Yeah, they've come with us on tour, and it's, I saw a quote from Jerry Seinfeld the other day that said, "There's no such thing as fun for the whole family." And I was like, oh, amen. So, as they get older, it's becoming a little more challenging to make sure they're all excited, but we'll do what we can in any given city. If there's museums or if there's parks or if there's ice cream or whatever it is, we do some investigation before we get there, and then we hit the ground running. But it's an interesting position in terms of archetypal, the mom archetype, the artist archetype, the social activist servant. I just feel like in some ways I'm not who I am if I'm not serving in some way. So a lot of times they'll kind of fight out there. Like, I want to be a mom. I'm all snuggled up with one of my children, and I have to get on a plane and fly to France and do a show. And, do they want to come with me or not? So it's a constant navigation of my looking at their nervous systems, and they're, like you said, they're learning all the time just through watching people or overhearing conversations or, taking part in debates in our house or whatever it is. And then when we travel, it just goes to a whole other level. And I love when they can note cultural differences, because as Canadians, it was kind of predictable for us to have that gap year travel. And even the news was a lot more sort of internationally inclusive versus just about our ethnocentricity in Canada. So yeah. I don't know if that answers your question.
No, that's great. And as somebody who has had this curiosity in the health and wellness realm, and you've traveled around, I'm curious, have you met a lot of interesting healers and had experiences in different parts of the world? And if so, which you're saying yes, can you share what some of those are?
Yeah, I mean, in the Amazon River, we met a medicine woman in her own environment, and just to see her, I'm an apothecarist, I'm a blender by trade. So just to see her magic and her medical intuition and her power, and to watch her in her environment serve people in her community as a healer, and all these, there's energy healers. There's people who know every single thing about the body. And I actually, right before COVID happened, I was putting together a symposium, sort of a body symposium. And it was all about movement and proprioception and understanding everything that's going on in here. And really, it's a love letter to those of us who are coming back into our bodies after having been dissociated for so long. But yeah, a lot of the Eastern philosophies, Chinese medicine, all of it. I just feel like there's so much incredible information from hundreds of years back. And then the sort of modern application of what they're being used for now. And then the leading edge. I work with so many doctors who are constantly going to conferences, and we're challenging each other. It's just a different kind of relationship with doctors that's available, where you're collaborators for health, and I know it's been so scary for pharmaceutical companies to really shift the consciousness around having it be preventative and setting us up to have the longevity that we're sort of built for, and then how to navigate that in the middle of all this confusing messaging about eat this and you'll be happy, wear this and you'll be happy. It's like, okay, how do you separate from what's presented for money-making endeavors from what will actually contribute to physical health and physical embodiment.
A lot of it we just have to try on with our individual biology.
Exactly. It's fun. It's kind of like paint, like which one works for this particular one. But again, it's, can we trust our bodies? Yes. Can we trust our thoughts? Sometimes. So just being discerning too has been a big one in any given moment. Just saying, where did this voice come from? Where did this idea emerge? Is this still true? It's a big one. And there has to be a willingness to show up and bring a hyper presence. And that's a muscle. That's a muscle to cultivate, I would say.
Talk about some of the current experiments you're doing. Earlier, you mentioned mushrooms. I'm curious what types of mushrooms. And we didn't talk about supplements, but are there certain supplements you like to take on a regular basis? Anything that's in the experimental realm right now for you that you're excited about?
Well, as a woman in my mid to late 40s now, I'm in perimenopause on that journey, and it's so often not talked about. But getting into peptides and hormone therapy and understanding the effects of certain foods and what are the triglyceride levels, and really getting actively involved with wanting a full panel, whether it's blood work. I do it every 3 months or so, sometimes more often. I'll do blood work, and I want to understand everything that's going on and see what the changes were, why those changes happened. It's been really empowering. And I am surrounded by a lot of doctors who are constantly trying to see what the next thing is. A woman named Stephanie Wolf, whom I work with out of Los Angeles. Pardon me. She's been such an incredible inspiration and mentor and collaborator, and that care in that way is, it's not, sometimes it's appropriate. So I'm on an SSRI. Sometimes it's appropriate to have allopathic care. And a lot of times it's not necessary. And it's just a quicker way to get the patient out of the room. So to work with people who leave room for all these internal systems and leading edge understandings of hormones and peptides and nutrients and supplements, and so there's thymosin, there's NAD, there's all the mushrooms, there's I live for matcha, green tea, all the superfoods and new ones emerging all the time of these magical plants. My husband especially is quite obsessed. So we're always looking at it. We're not precious about it though. It doesn't mean that he won't eat a pizza. It just means that we know it's available and when we need it. And we just generally, my supplement counter is an embarrassment or it's a wealth of riches. You pick. But it's ongoingly played with, quercetin and CoQ10, and just the whole list is really exciting. And if we have the bandwidth and we're privileged in order to be able to afford some of this, because right now it's not covered in insurance. A lot of the leading edge stuff can't be covered because it's a direct threat to certain companies who would be making billions from our ill health.
Alanis, tying back to the travel piece, I know part of when you travel around, what you like to do is collect different essential oils. And they're something that you're obsessed with in the health and wellness realm. So talk about what ones you're really into right now and how you got turned on to those.
Oh, how sweet. So I've had different mentors over the years. A woman named Nadine Artemis, who started Living Libations, and years ago she started Osmosis, and she would source oils from all over the planet, and I would just sort of sit at her feet like a little sister and just geek out with her basically. And she'd say, "Hey, come back and check these special drawers," and that's what my house looks like. My house has got thousands of oils, and sometimes I'll reference books, what something is known for. But a lot of times I just rely on the direct experience. And at night, one of my survival strategies is just to hold my breath. I don't think I'm alone on that one. Just short, shallow breaths for, and sending the message consistently that somehow life is not safe and that I'm in danger, which is not true. Sometimes it's true, but mostly it's not true. So deep breathing has been a really powerful help for me because it brings me into the present moment, and anything I've been trying to sublimate or sweep aside just comes into very pointed relief. And the oils help me because I have tons of them on my counter or in my bag at any given time. And just having the scent be part of the process of becoming more aware of my breath work has been a game changer, because I used to take deep breaths when I was younger, but I'd still be nervous. I'd still be anxious, and I'd still go back to the grip in the chest. But with oils, it's almost like this invitation into sensuality, into memory, into that, especially as a highly sensitive, getting into the subtlety of blends. I'm just like, my eyes want to roll back into the back of my head, just for the joy of it,
Are your kids and husband fans as well?
They're fans of my love of it. They do love it. The kids love it, but I'm the one that's obsessed. And my husband now he's adorable. He'll just joke that he's so happy. He's like, I have a wife that always smells so amazing. I'm like, yeah, it's not always, but they love it. It's my passion though, for sure. And it's always been private. And then I collaborated with Nadine Artemis at Living Libations and made an oil called Wholeness for one of the workshops that I was doing at a place called 1440 Multiversity. And we made that available. And we might reinvigorate that just because it's so low. Sandalwood, neroli, vetiver. There's just so many amazing blends that can be made. And even the disasters, oh, you're not supposed to mix those two. I'm just like, yeah, let's mix those two. And I had a mentor, a gentleman named Joel Bruce Wallach, who used to play with chakra work. And he would invite us into, what would happen if your third eye and your heart chakra blended? What would be available there? What if your root chakra and your crown chakra blended? What would be available there? So anyone who will take a model and be willing to update it or turn it on its ass a little bit, or just take a risk with it, those are the renegades of the model expansion is kind of where I come in. And it's a combination of being very aware of the fact that I'm standing on the shoulders of giants, whether it's apothecarists or psychologists or neurochemical geniuses, scientists. It's like just knowing that I can take in all their brilliance and that they're open enough to have a conversation with me about what does this imply and what's next and where are we going and what worked and what hasn't been working and where's everyone's hair on fire right now. I just love talking with leaders and supporting them, not only to continue their incredible work, but kind of make it fun for both of us to sit on that edge of the cliff and talk about, where could this go next? It's probably my favorite thing.
It's such an incredible time with the internet, with this information being able to spread, and for people that can afford it, there's so many different superfoods and essential oils and different things that we can order to our door, powders. So it's a beautiful time. Excited about the new CD. I can't wait to meditate to it. Alanis, really enjoyed the conversation. We went and covered quite a bit and got into the weeds, and I really enjoyed this. So
thank you. And thank you for your kindness and warmth and intelligence and your huge capacity to hold the complexity and a deep kindness. So thank you.
Alanis mentioned Byron Katie a couple times during our chat. To watch my full conversation with Byron Katie, head here. I know you're going to love it.
From the floor, the laughter that came out, I don't know how many years in time it had been since. I think that was probably the most authentic.